Hey everybody, this is Troy over at Uncomfortable Truths. Thanks for checking me out. So we have another day, and of course, it's another instance of Donald Trump breaking a promise to former supporters such as myself by deciding that he's going to continue some wars that we had going on, despite promising that he was going to pull us out of those wars. And instead, he's going to start a couple new ones. And particularly right now, he wants to focus on Venezuela. Now, Ryan Grimm and Sagar Enjeti and also Jack Polson had a really great article over at Drop Site that we're going to cover. Let's take a look. Most of you who are watching this already know, but Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State and warmonger working for the Trump administration, and he is currently pushing for regime change in Venezuela on behalf of Donald Trump. Now, for whatever reason, Donald Trump gets a lot of credit given to him when things are going well. But for some reason, when Trump does something that is an obvious violation of the promises he made during the campaign, a lot of his supporters just make excuses for why that is. And honestly, guys, it's getting a little bit out of hand, the excuses that Trump supporters are making for Donald Trump. For example, people are running around saying that it's Marco Rubio's decision to do this regime change war in Venezuela. Well, for those of you that have been paying attention, Trump's been running around talking about going to war with Venezuela on his own quite a bit. And don't forget, he also hired Marco Rubio. So if he didn't like what Marco Rubio was doing, he'd get rid of him. And because he's not getting rid of him, it's very clear that what's going on is that Trump is supporting this war. So taking a look at this is inside Marco Rubio's push for regime change in Venezuela. This is a reporting from Ryan Grimm, Sagar Enjeti, and Jack Polson. And they found that U.S. intelligence has assessed that little to none of the fentanyl trafficked in the United States is being produced in Venezuela, despite recent claims from the Trump administration. And also, Trump himself has been making these claims. It's not just the administration. A senior U.S. official directly familiar with the matter told Drop Site. The official noted that many of the boats targeted for strikes by the Trump administration don't even have the requisite gas or motor capacity to reach U.S. So what they're talking about, guys, is that recently what's been going on is the Trump administration has just been bombing fishing boats. Now, before all of you start going off about how it's an unnamed source, I want you to keep in mind that this has been backed up a lot by what Trump is saying himself about how he just wants to go into Venezuela and take the oil. But also, we've had senators such as Rand Paul who have been honest about what's going on, saying, yeah, there's no evidence of this, which they get into here. So Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, who similarly noted that zero fentanyl is produced in Venezuela. So on Thursday, President Donald Trump referred to possible ground action. Yeah, that means boots on the ground, everybody. He's literally talking about sending American soldiers, boys from Wyoming, to go into Venezuela, despite the fact that Venezuela is not a threat to the United States whatsoever. Because what President Trump really wants to do is just overthrow Nicolás Maduro and put a puppet to big business for the United States in his place. This has nothing to do with making Americans safer, and it has nothing to do with regular day-to-day Americans' well-being. But President Donald Trump now wants to make sure that we're putting boots on the ground in Venezuela, which is a complete violation of the promises that he made on the campaign trail when he said no more regime change war. So now President Donald Trump is referring to possible ground action, claiming at a press conference that the sea drugs are coming in at only 5% of what they were a year ago, but now they're coming in by land. The land is going to be next, he said, indicating he was willing to bypass congressional approval. And on Friday, the U.S. announced it is sending an aircraft carrier to Latin America in further escalation. So he just continues to go through with this, and he's escalating more and more and more because he doesn't care about the promises he made to us. We've been hoodwinked. He lied about it completely. He was never going to be a president of peace. He was never going to stop the regime change wars. Instead, he was going to continue supporting all of the wars that Biden was supporting. Now, if like me, you voted for President Trump because you thought he was going to be a peacemaker, then you have to admit you're wrong and you were lied to. President Donald Trump is a complete liar when it comes to these regime change wars because he's out there starting them himself right now. Now, two sources familiar with discussions at the White House note that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a longtime proponent of regime change in Venezuela, has been the driving force behind the aggressive military and rhetorical posture toward the Maduro regime. Toward that end, Secretary Rubio, also in charge of the remnants of the U.S. Agency for International Development, has directed millions of dollars in money previously allocated for pro-democracy, which, guys, for those of you that don't know, Pro-democracy funds literally just means using that money for regime change wars for the CIA. It's to overthrow governments that don't agree with us, because the United States directly supports most of the dictatorships in the world. We have no interest in spreading democracy, and that is never what any of this is about. Rubio cycled through multiple arguments for regime change in Venezuela during the early months of the administration, which were largely based around human rights and election concerns, which were unconvincing to Trump. And unfortunately, guys, Trump doesn't actually care about any of this stuff. So it's really easy for people like Marco Rubio to just go in there and change their argument and make it a little bit more appeasing to Trump. And then Trump's going to say, yeah, whatever you want to do, Marco, you're doing a great job. And that's what's happening here. Well, Marco Rubio is not doing a fantastic job. This war will not benefit Americans whatsoever, because what they're doing right now isn't making America great again, and it's not America first. The only thing they're doing is putting business interests ahead of your interests. You were lied to by the Trump administration, and that is continuing today, and it's probably going to continue for the rest of his term. So once Rubio presented a new argument to Trump that Maduro was a narco-terrorist drug trafficker based on a 2020 indictment by the Department of Justice under the first Trump administration over alleged cocaine trafficking. The official noted Trump's personal distaste for drugs and a campaign pledge to use the military against Mexican drug cartels as an important impetus for Trump greenlighting recent strikes. With Trump unable so far to carry out attacks on Mexican cartels, strikes seem as politically untenable. Rubio effectively steered his gaze to Maduro. The potential of access to Venezuela's vast oil resources made the argument that much easier. Yeah, I bet they did. Rubio's policy was most recently at a crossroads after Maduro offered to turn over those oil resources to the U.S. in exchange for a cessation of hostilities. Trump acknowledged the offer in a recent appearance, saying Maduro offered everything. You know why? Because he doesn't want to F around with the United States. Now, despite Maduro offering everything, Trump rejected the offer after being swayed by arguments from Rubio that the best way to secure Venezuela's oil reserves was facilitate regime change in Venezuela and make a better deal with a new government. A recent U.S. government assessment of Venezuelan oil exports to China found nearly 500,000 barrels a day, a small fraction of the country's total capacity, which Trump is turning down in the immediate term. Because Trump doesn't want to have peace. Trump isn't even willing to make a deal. He wants everything, but he doesn't want it for you. He doesn't want it for the American people. He just wants it because Trump is a tool of big business. So there you have it. You have Marco Rubio and Donald Trump promising to drag Americans into another regime change war. Now, if you're like me and you voted for Donald Trump because you didn't want to have regime change wars, or because you didn't want to keep supporting Ukraine, or you wanted to put Americans' needs above those of a foreign country, and you know exactly which country I'm talking about, you've all been led on a ride. The uncomfortable truth is we were tricked. Donald Trump is no different from Joe Biden. He is not putting the needs of Americans first, and we need to address that. And for Trump supporters like myself, we need to stop supporting him when he's not doing the things that we elected him to do. So everybody, that's what we have. We have Donald Trump bringing us into another regime change war, and I hate to see it, but that is the reality, and that is the uncomfortable truth. So go ahead and do me a favor and hit like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Take care, everybody.